Hello and welcome back to another Pod by the Fireside with me, Gregory Alexander Sharp. You can call me Greg. At the time of recording this episode, I'm proud and delighted and a little bit nervous to be able to say that finally and irreversibly, we are live. Episodes 1, 2 and 3 hit the platforms earlier this week, right on schedule. And actually, having said that, episode 1 made a break for it a bit early, but I'll forgive it. It was my first episode after all. Whatever the case, all those episodes are now out there and available on all the usual platforms. This week, which is week 5, is also episode 5 of our summer series on the subject of werewolves, and it's drawing inexorably to a close this week. So it's a bit of a sad moment in a way, end of an era. If you haven't listened to the first 4 episodes, then by all means do go back and listen to them first, or in whatever order you want to, whatever takes your fancy really. But not having done so doesn't preclude you from getting tremendous value and entertainment from sticking around right here and right now in episode number 5. You can always pick the other ones up later. It's really up to you. That's the beauty of these things, really. So my partner for this episode is unsurprisingly friend of the show, the very learned Mr. Fenrir Thorvaldsen himself. And I'm going a bit easy on credentializing him this week because that's really the point of the show. There's quite a bit of that to come. And that brings me to the subject of this week's show, which I'm calling the new breed. And when I say the new breed, that's really Fen and me, basically. That we are the new breed. All right. by my definition, at least. So we've spent the past 4 episodes talking about everyone else's contribution to this genre in quite a lot of detail, and we've made passing references to our own. And tonight we're going to set the record straight, and we're going to interview each other, which is something I'm really looking forward to, and I imagine many of you are too. So, hi Fen, how is it going? Are you ready for the Inquisition to come?
I certainly am. At least I don't have to have notes to remember the dates for this one, because I probably know them.
Let's hope.
Even though I've not looked at the pre-prepared questions that have been pre-prepared and sent to me, and I've been really good and not looked at them.
There's quite a lot of self-control been demonstrated today, folks, because we have prepared our questions in advance. We have swapped them, and we have both nobly refused to read each other's questions. And I promise you, we've really not looked at them. So we will be answering these questions in real time and hopefully not making it up as we go along, but we'll be answering, off the cuff and from the heart. And, that's what you guys deserve, right?
Yes. And I'm a Taurus rising. I bet that's one of the questions.
Well, I'll cross that one off the list. I mean, you've just answered it.
I'm sorry if I
ruined that one for a lot of people.
Oh.
Okay. For the final time in this summer series, Fen has joined me in my log cabin deep in the forest. The full moon is above us. We've got enough peanut M&Ms to sink a battleship. And we finally turn to our favourite subject. Us.
Yay!
We're actually sat round a fireside outside the log cabin because it's summer and it's warm and balmy, and somebody's cast a spell in the clearing that the log cabin's in, and the werewolves can't get to us, so we're safe. So we've got marshmallows, we've got peanut M&Ms, and we've got our own work to talk about. So, as I said, we're essentially going to interview each other about that work tonight. I know it's something a lot of you have been looking forward to. As a reminder, Fen is published many times over and about to be published again. And he's also the brains and the voice behind Werewolf, the podcast. Whilst I've written 2 novels which feature werewolves as the main characters. The first, Il Lupo, was published in January of this year, and the second, Kill and Cure, is out soon. And who knows, it might already be out. Depends when you're listening to this podcast. So I happen to know that the number 7 always grabs Fen's attention whenever it crops up.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the 7th time in this series that I've it's not, I've just made that up. This However,
I was convinced. I was convinced.
That would have been good. Actually, I ought to go back over the previous 4 episodes and see how many times it's come up. I'm almost convinced it is the 7th time. So, I've prepared 7 searching questions. Let's get to it. So, Fen, I know all about you, but our listeners might not know much beyond this podcast. But before that came along, you were already a published author several times over. And would you mind walking our listeners through a bit of your bibliography prior to the podcast happening?
Prior to my fiction novels, I wrote a few non-fiction books. As I had an injury in 2017, which sort of changed things for me, and part of that process was to learn a lot about myself. So I wrote a self-help book, which basically broke down all the self-help books and all the help books that I'd read, and basically put each book into a paragraph. So I wrote that back in 2017 and released that back in 2017. It did quite well, which I was really surprised. And then after that, one of my things that I've done is I've been an MMA coach for years and supported fighters of all different levels and of all different standards. So I wrote a book on the psychology of the mind behind fighting, because I think if you can get in a cage and fight somebody, you can achieve anything. So it was like working on the psychology of the athlete and how to bring that into your own life. And again, that was a fun book, and it sold amazingly in America, and it sold nothing in the UK, which was hilarious. Then I'd been a teacher for years, and now I'm no longer a teacher. What I wanted to do is just write a couple of books about what I've learned about teaching, and one of them was the brain development of a child and how it affects their behavior, and the other one was just about extending the more able, because I did a lot of work on inclusion with pupils at schools. And then the final one was I do some ghostwriting as well, and I wrote a book for a lovely lady who then didn't want to spend the money on publishing it, so I published it myself under my name, and it's about color therapy. It's not really my area of interest, but it's an interesting book, and it was a nice thing to write. So those are the previous books I've written under my name, and then somehow I ended up publishing the fiction books.
Very good indeed. So
yeah,
we'll get to the fiction books imminently. But you mentioned that you'd had an accident, I think in 2017, and you refer to it in the book Werewolf Movies and TV, and that it's clearly had a profound impact on the course of, the story of your life, I guess, if you will, but a big change in direction and all sorts of stuff being different for you and unforeseen. But it ultimately led you down a path to creating the podcast. So can you tell us a little bit about that transition and how it diverted you to finding a level of therapy, I guess, in a creative process?
Well, I had a head injury at work in 2017, and what stemmed from that was a kind of change in personality, a change in certain things. I'd had quite a few concussions before in life, but never anything that had been so serious as that. And from that stemmed, I still have acute migraine syndrome, which I tend to get a migraine every single day. And if you've never had a migraine and you don't know what a migraine's like, then God bless you, you're wonderful. If you know what a migraine's like, then you know that's hell. So I went through a period where I had to kind of get used to the fact that I was going to be in lots of pain all the time. And obviously that had a massive effect on my mental health. And what I then did was work with psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health professionals. And part of what they were or trying to get me to do was to journal and look at my life and see how it had would affect me and things, and how I could accept that this might be for the rest of my life and everything. And the podcast came out from the journaling that I was doing, where I saw two sides to my personality. And yeah, it allows me in a different way to sort of live a different kind of life, and share how I feel and how I don't feel about the world, and all those different kinds of things. It was an amazing time. I mean, the mental health fight is still ongoing, because at the moment I'm doing acceptance therapy, where I've got to try and accept that these migraines are here for the rest of my life. But I'm not very good at cognitive behavior therapy and all these kind of things, because I'm a right miserable catastrophic thinker. So what I tend to do is I tend to pick holes in it, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to work with the process. So yeah, I find the podcast and the journaling through the podcast really, really helps.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
look, I think I speak on behalf of everybody who's listening when we wish you well, and if there is any degree of recovery from the migraines, gosh, I hope that comes to you soon, for sure.
Well, the great thing about the podcast is there's no deadline except my own. I can write when I'm able to write. If that's at 4:00 in the morning, then that's 4:00 in the morning. If I'm always one story ahead, so that if I can't get something out by the deadline, then I've always got something that can go out.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's kind of a perfect way of doing it. And what I thought was just going to be a hobby seems to be a possible direction in life with the podcast, especially. And the writing's the same. I can write whenever it, there's no, I tried to do other things, but I found that deadlines and being at places on time and stuff like that just got in the way. But this I can do whenever I want, and it's all mine, and there's no editors telling me I can't use the words "in fact," which is very important.
Now we've got a question coming up about your where you get your ideas from, and a bit about the process as well. But first of all, is the concept of the posit, right? So you've sort of alluded to it there when you mentioned a couple of facets of your personality that you'd recognized throughout, this period of transition that's been so significant in your life. And I have a feeling that the roots of the posit were in that comment. Could you just describe the posit, the interplay between the posit and the host, and then maybe tell us a little bit about how that came into being? I think it's unique, by the way. I've not come across it in quite this way anywhere else.
I thought it was unique until I read The Golden Compass. Well, it's my idea and sensibility of the posit and theirs is very different. I thought I'd found this unique premise, and I was absolutely heartbroken when I read those. But never mind. But the idea of the posit to me is that centuries ago there was a pack of wolves and a pack of humans, and it was a really bad winter. I try and link it with a big volcanic disruption that happened around the time, and they weren't doing very well. So through what my partner finds hilarious, magic and bullshit, they combine, and the wolves give up their souls, and the humans take on the souls of the werewolves. And the deal is that the werewolf souls will live forever, but they're not physical. But the humans don't live forever and can't choose to keep the werewolf soul. But the werewolf soul can move on if it wants, or if the human dies, it can move on. So they come to some kind of deal. It's drinking blood and ritual nastiness and all that crap. If you read that, listen to that thing. And then the whole idea behind the posit really was that I read The Chimp Paradox, a really good self-help book, and he talks about the beast that's at the back of your brain. He calls it chimp, that you've got this animal that's the first point of all focus. Any senses that come into your head goes through this animal first, and if it knows how to react, it reacts straight away. If it doesn't know how to react, then it reacts in three ways. And we've talked about this before, the three Fs, So what I did was just take that idea of the animal just a little bit further, and instead of it leaving it as an animal kind of phase, I left it as it's a thinking, contemplative thing that's there as a kind of support unit, and it can help out, and it can also not help out. And when the two of them combine, it can become something that not very many things can cope with. So yeah, the idea of the posit, I mean, like in the Golden Compass, everyone in that kind of universe has an animal soul that lives with them. There's no transforming into that being or anything like that, but they share their lives with something else. So it's like, for me, it was like you've always got your best friend with you, and he's a very useful chap to have. So yeah, it was just having the beast that you can contain, I suppose.
Yeah.
Although Fen tends to, my werewolf soul posit tends to control Will a lot more than Will tends to control Fen.
Well, I suppose in some essences, Fen is the senior partner in the relationship, given that he's been there in adult wolf form since Will was a babe in arms, right? He was in his cot, wasn't he, when they first met?
Yeah, the great thing about the story is that Fen has been through history. So at the moment, I am giving stuff away, but like he's been through a Viking phase, so his second person was a Viking that he linked with, and at the moment I'm doing all my damnedest to study up on William Marshall, who was an 11th century knight, and I'm going to create. So he's been through lots of different people who've lived different lives. So he's going to be with William Marshall, who was a very chivalrous, devout, religious person. So it's going to be interesting to see the absolute opposite of a Viking and the absolute opposite of Will, and how Fen deals with that. So again, it's going to be interesting to put these characters in different contexts. So I really enjoy that. So we'll see how that goes.
I imagine it will be quite bloody.
Yeah, he was a bit of a boy. Was William Marshall? He was he was a crazy dude. Yeah, he was
Crazy dude.
he was still leading. He was still leading the charge into battle at the age of 70. So he's a great character to have for my posits, because they stay the age of the wolf when it died in dog years. So they stay at, in my case, it's 45. So William Marshall will have stayed 45 until his 70s. So yeah, it's quite
Right too.
yeah. Lucky bastard.
You know, a lot of these people from history were remarkably brave. I was listening to a history podcast that I listened to, The Rest is History podcast, in fact, that I listened to, and they were talking about the 100 Years' War, and there was a German chap who was a prince or something, and he'd been a great knight in his time, and there was this battle taking place where he was going to be on the losing side, but he was quite old by this time. And he said, even though we're losing, I need to get out there on that field and fight with my kinsman. Put me on the horse and lead me into battle. And his squire said to him, "But sir, you've been blind for 10 years." He didn't care. Off he went.
Yeah, definitely.
It didn't end well, but that was kind of what happened.
It was a different time, to say the least, wasn't it? One of my, I can't remember, but there's a famous battle where Wellington is sat on his horse, and one of his commanders comes riding up next to him, and Wellington turns around. I can't remember. Oh, I forgot his name. But Wellington turns around and goes, "Oh, damn, sir, you've lost your leg, sir." And he turns around and he looks down, and his leg's been shot off by a cannonball. And he goes, "Oh, yes, sir, I have, sir." I'm like, what?
That's so Monty Python, right?
Yeah, but it's fully like, it's like the knights in Monty Python. But like, I just can't imagine what these people kind of could do and went through. I mean,
Yeah.
and it frightens me a bit at the strength and capabilities of some humans.
Yes, indeed. On the relationship between Will and Fen, how would you describe that?
With Fen, what he's done is he's gone through all the different experiences with people. So his first person died, who was an amazing guy, died because of the woman he loved didn't love him, and then we have the Viking bit where the guy was not a lover, but he was a fighter and was into power and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to have William Marshall, who was a pious person. Then we're going to go into the 14th century with France and stuff like that. So he's trying to find the right person that matches him. So he's taken on Will here, who he recognizes being completely a sociopath, psychotic. And in this case, like with William Marshall is the controlling person within that relationship. He never becomes a werewolf. He just has this character there that makes him extra strong, lets him live a bit longer. But with Will, Fen's got the reins, and he's like, whoa, we need to just calm it back a little bit and not quite do that and stuff. So it is a bit of father and son relationship, but also we have the fact that Fen really likes the kind of freedom that Will allows him, in the fact that he can do anything and kind of get away with it, and he's just a horrible person. But Fen's a real anti-villain in that he's, as you've probably heard, he's got something in for the human race. Really, he thinks they're disgusting, and he hates the factors that are affected by the natural world, and he hates the way that they look at life, and the politics of the world and all that kind of stuff. He's a bit like me, really, in that way. But
Yeah,
then,
where did you come up with the idea?
no idea. But then, what I like about him is he just hates everything about it. It doesn't matter if it's capitalism, doesn't matter if it's communism. There is no answers. The only answer is to get rid of the human race, and it's like, okay. And Will's thinks he's an artist and thinks that everything that he does is art, and the more horrible it is, the more artistic it is. And Fence kinds of goes, well, that's okay, as long as we're causing absolute horror. I mean, my idea of Fen is that he's a real lachiest. He wants to see the world burn just to watch it, as the famous Batman line goes. He just wants to see the world just destroy itself and fall apart for no other reason than he just wants to see it fall apart, and see what happens afterwards. And he's in a lucky position because he's not going to die.
Right. Although, of course, we do learn that there is a method, but we'll keep that to ourselves.
Yes, we can't tell anybody about how to kill these werewolves. That's really not good.
It's not as simple as bashing it over the head with a walking stick with a silver handle.
No, it's a lot.
I'll tell you that much.
It's a lot less complicated than everyone thinks, but don't tell Sally that.
Yeah, no, whatever you do, not Sally, of all people.
Yeah.
So the ideas, broadly speaking, you've come up with a whole bunch of different stuff. I mean, you started out, with a weaponized werewolf. You've introduced different scenarios, as you've mentioned, through the years, sort of Viking piece. Where did these come from? What was the inspiration for that? I know there are a few different sources, but maybe you can talk us through that a little.
Well, I with the thing, it's that for me, as you can tell by my non-fiction bits, everything's about psychology and philosophy and the idea of living a certain kind of life and all that kind of thing. But on top of that, I wanted to kind of point a finger at how unfair life is, and life isn't good and life isn't wonderful and all that kind of thing. And there is no happy ending. It doesn't end until it ends, and then it's gone. So every episode, what I try and do, unless it's a series, is I try and take it in a slightly different direction. It's not all about murdering, killing, and destruction and horror. It's a lot of it is about just the interaction in situations, things. So every time I write an episode, I try and do something slightly different. Where the inspiration comes from can be anywhere. It can be from someone I'm talking to who ends up being a character, to reading a book and getting an idea from a book, not necessarily stealing the premise, but yeah, a lot of it comes from my feelings at the time. I noticed when the Ukrainian war kicked off, there was a kind of something that stemmed from that in the anger at the situation. And then the last episode was I was so annoyed because a woman ran across the front of me and she had 2 canvas bags. And for some reason, the focus of the whole thing was the canvas bags. And then that turned into 2 hippies living in London who were called Smith-Mungbean and lived on the boho houseboat, the Pequod. And yeah, just taking a snipe. It's a way of just taking a snipe at people, really, to be honest. I'm just a horrible person. But it's kind of like where the ideas come from is characters, moments in time, and anything that I'm kind of interested in. I love medieval Viking history. I like that, and I had to take a shot at the vampires at some time because it's not a werewolf thing if it hasn't got a vampire rising somewhere in it, as we know. And yeah, I don't know really where the ideas come from. And if anyone's got any ideas, please send them my way. I'm on episode 112 and it's getting scary.
Well, I'll just drop in the vampires. I think were my favourite sort of tertiary characters. I just love the characterization. Just indulge me. Tell everybody about how you painted that picture. I loved it.
They were all very, very Anne Rice, dressed in latex. They all had samurai swords because that's part of the gear that a vampire has now. They were all incredibly beautiful and good looking in a very androgynous way. And yeah, they were all very much up themselves and very, yeah, it was just, apart from Colin, the accountant vampire, who was, was it Derek? I can't remember. Oh, it's Colin. Yeah, was it Derek?
Derek
The vampire.
Derek the accountant. Yeah.
Yeah, Derek the accountant vampire who was trying his best, bless him. So yeah, it was. I just took Underworld and I took all the most recent vampire ideas and just ripped the Michael out of them. To be honest, it just makes me laugh how everything is vampirish like that at the moment when it comes to action and adventure, not sparkly.
Not sparkly.
I couldn't do sparkly vampires. I just couldn't. I tried. I was going to put sparkly vampires in, and I just couldn't do it. I just really couldn't.
Couldn't bring yourself to do it.
No, I couldn't. If he'd have laughed mirthlessly, I would have cried. Sorry, Stephanie, but you laughed mirthlessly. If you say that more times, I'll cry.
Oh dear. Okay, listen, that's my favourite character or set of characters, other than Will and Fen. But who are yours?
My favourite character is Fen. I like his perception of the world. I'm not particularly fond of Will. Will is an obnoxious bastard. He's so far up himself. He thinks the world is absolute oyster, and he's so self-aggrandizing and stuff. And but I think he needs to be that so that Fen can work off him. And Fen doesn't really have a. If you listen to the episodes, it's all from Will's point of view, really. But yeah, Fen is the character because he's like the puppet master behind the scene, holding the strings and sorting things out. I really like Derek the vampire, and I really loved Phil the Magnificent, the guy that could do seances.
The guy on stage in the vampire series. I loved him.
Yeah,
he was great.
That was one of my favorite things to do, was try and find as many superlatives for these people as I could. So he was Phil the Magnificent, Phil the Wonderful, Phil the Fantastic, and every time I mentioned Phil, I got to say a different superlative.
Yeah.
And what I liked about him, he was genuine.
Yes, he turned out to be not a charlatan.
No, and it was the surprise that Will ended up like speaking to all the people he killed and how pleased he was that there were so many.
Did you feel, and thinking back to the question you asked me a few weeks ago about did I draw inspiration for Agatha from Maliva from the Wolfman, and I'd said no, and then I thought about it and I was like, well, maybe. Did you feel any parallels between that scene and the sex cinema in American Werewolf in London with the dead people?
I completely stole that premise.
Okay.
Because what I wanted to do was to show that Will, unlike David, I wanted to show that Will was like pleased. You know, that all these people were crying and like he
Yeah.
killed all these people. He was doing a body count.
Absolute
While
reversal.
Dave,
Yeah.
while Dave was like really feeling guilty and disgusted because we have one woman coming towards the fantastic Phil, descrying and crying and telling him what an evil bastard he is, and Will's like, "Wow, this is amazing! How fantastic! Did I really do that? That's brilliant!"
I mean, David Kessler is kind of destroyed by the experience, and
Yeah,
Will D. Beast, it makes his day.
yeah. Like, he goes back and sees Phil again just so he can have another chat with him. You know, it's like, this is brilliant. I get to sort of see how many people I've killed and
Yeah,
everything. You know,
I love that.
yeah. I completely stole that. I have to
Okay.
admit, but I thought it'd be great from the perspective of like a sociopath. Way, what a job I've done! You know, it's like going back and watching your local team and seeing how many goals it's got. Really, isn't it? You
Yeah,
know,
a lot
you got
actually in
his
Will's
score.
case.
Yeah, he got his score, and I think the thing is that he's quite disappointed because they're all Fenn's kills from history.
Right.
So it's not just his. So he's slightly disappointed that he's not done more than he thought he'd done.
Yeah, has to share the plaudits.
Yeah, that's not good, is it?
No, never a good thing. So,
No.
if those are some of your favourite characters, what's your favourite sub-series within the series?
I like the Hitchhiker series with the character Sally, because Will up to that point had been a non-understanding, horrible, horrific character. He'd killed his own wife, and he just didn't really care about all this kind of stuff. And then he met I wouldn't say that he fell in love with her, but he found a character that he could sympathise with and kind of had a little bit of empathy for, and it's brought out a different side to the character, which I've commensurately completely now ignored and thrown away. But yeah, I quite like the way that he doesn't really know what to do because he wants to take care, and he has no idea why he wants to take care of this person. And he's just really he's like really conflicted and confused because it's the only time he's ever wanted to care or look after someone. And so it was quite interesting to write about him and his confusion, like why, what do I see in this person, you know? And then he tries to kill her a few times and he tries to do horrible things to her, but he just can't make himself do it, and he's just weirded out by it. And I think that's how a sociopath would respond. He'd be like, I don't really know how to do this, you know, what am I doing? I shouldn't have any empathy or care or even a bit of love for someone. So yeah, I like the Hitchhiker series. It is my favorite. My latest series is going to be one of my favorites as well, with the Nixies and stuff. So yeah, looking forward to it. Anything that you can put fishy fingers in the title is a winner for me.
And just for the audience's benefit, you've had a fish finger sandwich this very evening, have you not?
I did tartar sauce and fish finger sandwiches, food of the gods.
So
Yeah.
anybody who's an avid listener to the podcast, this week's episode, fishy fingers, fish finger sandwich for dinner. I mean, the timing's perfect.
I lived the life. Yeah.
So just turning our attention for a moment, if we may, to your process, right? So how do you go about recording your pod? Do you have $1 million sound studio in Ealing? Do you do a series of 100 episodes at a time? I mean, you've alluded to this. You said you always got one in the pipeline or one in advance. But how long does it take you to record? How long does it take you to edit? How did you have an experience of doing any of this stuff before you tried it out for the first time? I mean, what kind of happened?
When I started, it was all trial and error, and I must admit the first few podcasts were terrible. But what I did was I re-recorded everything and started again and got decent equipment. I had a Mac, and I went on eBay and bought a really cheap microphone that didn't work very well, and then I went on and got a very good microphone, and that made a huge difference. I live out in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, because often people will ask me, "What's that soundtrack in the background? All the birds and stuff." And I go, "That's my garden." And I just record in the summer house in between the cat having a pee in the corner in the litter tray and the dogs scrambling around. I do get quite angry at them at times because they do try and get involved. I always have one episode in the bank just in case I can't. I try to publish at 11 o'clock on Tuesday nights, and sometimes it can be a bit of a push. For writing, it just happens when it happens, and when I can, basically. And yeah, I sometimes I can sit down and 9 hours will pass. You're probably the same. Sometimes you sit down and 9 hours pass, and sometimes you sit down and you stare at a screen. You've been writing, but you've wrote the. So it all depends. But yeah, it really freaks me out about this business is how cheap it is to do. It costs me literally nothing, but it can have a huge effect. So yeah, that's basically the process. Yeah, and editing, it depends on the episode and how much effort I want to put in. Basically, if I want to put sound effects in and all that kind of stuff, it takes a long time. But sometimes with deadlines and stuff, I don't put all the sound effects in and stuff. So there was an episode a few weeks back where half of the episode has wonderful sound effects and then the other half has nothing. So, yeah.
Ran out of time.
Yes.
Some of your Viking series episodes had some fabulous sound effects, actually.
Yeah, I stole them off Vikings the series. Yeah, YouTube is a wonderful thing where you can just go and like record in the background. So there's like lots of scenes of battles and things. So you can just have your microphone on recording while you're talking or whatever, and in the background there's like fighting going on, or there's actually a Viking longship being rowed by a bunch of Viking rowers or whatever, and and free sound effects. I'll mention Pixabay.
Yes, I use Pixabay.
Yeah, they're wonderful, absolutely brilliant, and everything's off license, so you get them free and not copyrighted. So yeah, all that's really, really good. The only thing I really struggle with is copyrighted music, but if it comes up as a copyright, I just tend to change it and put something different on there. So yeah.
And do you script every last word, or do you sort of map it out and broadly follow it and improvise any?
I write a complete script, and what tends to happen is I tend to add an extra 10 minutes as I'm doing it. So it's very strange because the digressions and stuff that I go off on tend to have nothing to do with what I've written. But then I have to catch myself, or someone has to catch me and bring me back on topic again. But yeah, and then I transcript it at the end and put the transcript up as well. So yeah.
And it's the transcript that made its way into the first book, A Werewolf Story.
The book was written prior to the podcast, and I just wanted something to do as a hobby, and I had a couple of friends who were doing podcasts, and it just sounded like a really cool way to get your stuff out there. And I thought it'd be advertisement for the books. What I didn't realize was that actually the podcast is doing far better than the books. So yeah, the book was really the original thing, and then I just wrote my podcasts from that using the first 30 chapters, and now the books basically are just the transcripts of the podcast. So if you buy my book, which is coming out on the 7th of August, it is just the transcripts really of the other episodes. So if you go to Buzzsprout, you can get it for free. I shouldn't say that, should I? I should be really.
There you go. Adding value. You get freebies on this podcast, folks. Freebies.
Yeah, all the transcripts are already out there, so why buy the book? I don't know, but never mind.
People like a book. Sometimes.
Yeah,
some people like a book. Yeah,
it's got a very pretty cover.
It does. I've seen it.
Yeah, it's amazing what AI generation can do, isn't it?
So, in terms of other published works, since you've started, you did recently also publish your 365 Days of Werewolf Movies, and I guess that book served as a bit of research for episode 3 of this podcast, or at least some of the research you did for that book stood you in good stead for this podcast. But why don't you tell the listeners what that book is and how that came about and what they can expect to find in that one?
Well, it's very cheap because I basically made that book for notes for what I'm doing at the moment. I have a lot of spare time, so watching movies is kind of a hobby of mine, and I thought what I would do is I'd try and watch a year's worth of werewolf movies. It took me 5 years to watch a year's worth of werewolf movies, and then I just wrote the plot line of every one of them as a set of notes for myself. And then I've got a friend who is really into werewolf movies, and I was talking about it, and he said, "Can you send me a copy of that?" So I sent him a copy, and then he said, "You should just publish this." So I was like, "Okay." So it just ended up as it was a set of notes, and ended up being published. And basically, it's just a plot line for 362 bits of werewolf media, including The Simpsons and a bit of Indian Bollywood, Mexican. The genre itself is amazing, and I'm currently on werewolf film 384 because I went and looked at Japanese manga, which was so stupid of me. So yeah, I don't know if I think what I'll do is I'll just make a second edition and just increase the number of possibles in it. I haven't reviewed any of the films in it because a lot of them you need to just go and watch yourself, really, to be honest. And some of them that are actually written down because it's done in years from 1913 up to 2023. Some of them I haven't seen, so there's 3 films there that I haven't seen because apparently they don't exist these days. But I'm hoping that someone will find them for me and pass them on.
The first
But
two
yeah,
in the book, I think, are both in that category,
yeah,
right?
yeah. The first two, it's really, as I said in one of the podcasts, there's an IMDb rating for the first werewolf movie, but it doesn't actually exist. So those people that have seen it, well done, because according to the world, it doesn't exist. There's a few pictures of behind the scenes and stuff, but
Maybe those people are vampires.
oh gosh, I don't
Hadn't
know.
thought of that. They might be 200
No,
years old.
they could well be.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could be. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know. I've got a lot of people out there that believe that they are vampires and werewolves, so maybe I should ask them.
Well, I think the way to test it is to shove them off a tall building, and if they do a superhero landing, they're a vampire.
That's my next book, The
Yeah.
History of the Hero Landing.
Listen, just for the record, don't shove anyone off tall buildings, people. Right? That
No,
would be a bad
no.
thing to do. Don't try that at
Yeah.
home.
Yes, yes. There's an episode going to come out about that. I've just decided. Vampire test.
Yeah, indeed. So, listen, final question on this part of the podcast, then, and thank you for everything so far. What's next for Will and Fen, and what are your plans for their future?
I have no idea. I'm talking behind the scenes to lots of different companies and people and lots of stuff. And they're very professional and they're very I I don't really understand half of the words they say. So I don't really know what's going to happen at the moment. My thoughts are just to carry on as I am and just see how it goes because I'm enjoying having complete control of the IP, to be honest. As for Will and Fen, I have no idea. I'm doing a lot of research at the moment for a medieval period, but I'm not writing about it yet. And every week is an adventure with these two because the episode that was out this week started off being something incredibly different than it ended up being. So I don't know what's people say that to me. When's this going to happen? And I'm like, I don't know. Just when it does, you know. But that's my writing process. Just see what happens. So I don't know. We'll see.
Well, in the words of the Nixes, it's happening organically.
Yeah, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Fen. I mean, we've uncovered all sorts of brilliant and interesting stuff there, and I can guarantee that your audience, if any of them are listening, and I hope many of them are, will have really got a lot out of that, and they'll feel that that they've got a lot of value from spending this half an hour in the conversation with you. So thank you.
I have to apologize to everyone who thinks that Will is real, by the way, because when I started this series off, I convinced the world that Will was a real werewolf. And if you go on Spotify, I'm actually in documentary part of the podcasts, which is a bit weird. But yeah, so all to those people, it's actually made up. And I'm really sorry for all those people who believe that I'm a real werewolf. And that goes out to the young lady who spoke to me today. I don't have the magic powers to make you a werewolf. I'm sorry. Okay. Right. Is it my turn to take you apart now?
It's role reversal time. The hunter is become the hunted.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So
right. Well, I have to say, Greg, that and this isn't blowing, as we say in Manchester, this isn't blowing smoke up your ass. I really enjoyed your book, and it takes a lot for me to say that I've enjoyed someone else's work because, I am an envious soul at heart. So what I've done basically is I'm kind of going to ask you questions along the lines of, what you were thinking when you wrote it, how it came about, and all that.
What were you thinking, man?
Yeah, and I've got some questions about the craft behind it as well, because it was
Okay.
I like to pick writers' brains. I don't get to do it very often, so it's really nice when I get to actually speak to someone who knows what they're doing. My first question: you're a pretty successful guy in the business world. I can recognise that. So what on earth made you want to write this book? I mean, it's by no means like a small thing to do, to sit down and write thousands and thousands of words, and I can't imagine that really you've got a lot of spare time to do it. So I was just like, what was the thing that actually made you go, right, I really need to get this out there?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Thank you. Yeah, I'm busy. I'm a busy person with work. I've been a busy person with work since I was in my 20s. I'm very fortunate and grateful for the career I've had and I still have. And it doesn't furnish me with a whole big bunch of spare time or spare energy, for that matter, outside of work. So in order to add something to my day, it has to be something I'm passionate about. Otherwise, there really just isn't time and space for it. So why did I want to write in the first instance? That really dates back to my childhood, when I first started to get interested in things like the Incredible Hulk and things like Frankenstein's monster and werewolves. I wrote essays about them. The funny thing is that you couldn't get me to pick a pen up at school for love nor money, right? But you bring me home and I could spend hours writing to myself about stuff that my teachers didn't care about, right?
Yeah.
So that was something I did as a hobby, almost as a small boy, and I never showed this stuff to anybody else ever, not even my mum.
Right.
And then many years later, I went through a very difficult period in my life in the 1990s with grief. Lost my brother when he was 25 and I was 22. And then 4 years later, lost my mum too, after a sort of 10-year battle with breast cancer. And I suffered quite badly with depression and anxiety. I had panic attacks. I wound up becoming agoraphobic, and it affected my career. It affected my relationships with girlfriends and even friends and family. And I went through a pretty dark time, and I came out the other side of it eventually. When I started to get the right support and the right advice and things like that, and not be drinking quite so much and things like that. And I felt that I wanted to write something about about at least a feature of the experience that I'd had during that time. I had an urge for catharsis.
Yeah.
To put it in writing somehow, and I didn't know how to. So I was going to write a story set in West London in the 1990s about somebody who gets mixed up in a gang of wildcats and
Yeah.
it winds up destroying him. And this guy would make it out alive, but one of his friends would die. And this was the story I started to write. And I wrote nothing, 10 pages, right? I was so busy with work and I had all sorts of other stuff going on. So I didn't write that book. 2006 now, my dad passed away. 2007, sorry, my dad passed away.
Right.
And my wife Dawn and I went later that year for a break to Italy. I needed a break. I needed to get away. I was starting to struggle again a little bit, and I felt like I just needed to get away for a bit. So we flew to Rome, and we walked the streets, kind of gawping at the architecture, and then we hired a car, and we drove from Rome to the Amalfi Coast, which may start to sound familiar. In fact, we hit that part of the coast in a town.
I feel like I've been there, even though I've not yet.
Right. So we hit that part of the coast in a town called Vietri sul Mare, which those of you who've read the book will know that pops up.
Yeah.
And we tracked along the coast, and we wound up going to Pompeii, and spent a day in Pompeii, and then spent an evening in a pretty rough corner in Naples before flying home.
Mm.
And I said to Dawn, I'd been reading kind of a series of books by Glyn Iliffe around the Trojan War and the Odyssey at the time. So I was kind of into ancient stuff. And I said to Dawn, I said, look, I'm going to write that story, but I'm going to do it about this part of the world.
Yeah.
And she said, well, why don't you write about something you know about?
Mm.
And she said, what do you know about? You can't write an adventure about a golfer. Nobody's going to read that. What can you write about? And I said,
it might be a bestseller.
Well, it might be. It might be if it was Tiger Woods.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And I said, well, werewolves. I know about werewolves.
Yeah.
I said, well, why don't you do that then? And basically that's where it started. And again, I got so busy, I didn't have time for it. And it was actually when the pandemic came along that the 3 hours a day that I was commuting into and out of the city became my own time to do with as I wished. And I could either spend it in bed, or I could spend it doing more work, or I could find something else to do with it. So I wound up listening to audiobooks.
Yeah.
Dawn recommended the Harry Potter series to me. I listened to them. I was blown away by them. And I said, do you know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to write that damn book.
Does the writing actually, is it a hobby? I mean, what I mean by that, is it something that relaxes you? Is it something that you look forward to, or does it feel like a job?
It feels nothing like a job.
Right. That's the difficulty I would have had if you feel it was a job on top of your job. That would have made it difficult, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It would be good if it paid like a job. That would be handy, but no, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels it's something that I'm drawn to do.
Right. But I just wondered if it's like a relaxing side of your life. I mean, everyone says if you can make your hobby your job, it's the most perfect situation. But I know a lot of writers who just enjoy the experience of wandering off into their own little world for a while. That's what I particularly like about it. And I just wondered, on top of your workload, does it feel like extra workload, or is it just something that you enjoy intrinsically doing?
I get a buzz out of it.
Yeah.
Right. I actually get a kind of a thrill out of it. It's almost like you have a challenge that's set before you.
Yeah.
Right. Some people will get a buzz out of doing a crossword, right? They've nailed it. They've figured it out. Some people do the Sudoku.
Yeah.
I write a chapter in a book, and I stand up from behind my desk and I punch the air and I go, I've got it.
Yeah, no, I
figured it out. I figured it out.
I think one of the things that I find when I speak to my friends is they'll say, "What do you do?" Or you'll speak to someone new and then, "What do you do?" I go, "I write stories." and then they're like, it's not a real thing, or something like that. And then you go, "How much did you enjoy writing stories as a kid?"
Right.
And they always go, "Yeah, I really." Why don't you do it now? And you obviously, as a child, really enjoyed it, and it allowed you to get out of your. I was going to say get out of your mind, but that was a different era, in your life. But and I just don't think people realize that how wonderful it is to just let your mind go into this world. So I just wondered if it was a relaxing thing for you, or if it was a stressful thing for you.
It is a deeply relaxing thing for me, but it's also an energizing thing.
That's good.
And I can write early doors in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, I can write before work.
Right.
I can come into my office at home really quite early in the morning and just do an hour, right?
Yeah.
And be disciplined about when I stop, because I do have responsibilities that take precedence.
Yeah. I remember those.
And I'm very serious about that.
Yeah.
Um, so I never let the two things overlap. I should go on the record and say that. But I can come in here early doors and do an hour's writing, and the
Like
words
getting
flow.
prepared for the day. It's like having your cup of coffee.
Yeah. I mean, some people might go for a jog before. I used to go to the gym before work, right? And I
Yeah.
used to do 90 minutes in the gym 3 mornings a week before work. And I'd come out of there bouncing and
Yeah.
absolutely buzzing. And I'd smash into my day at work at 100 miles an hour. And I'd get the same sort of feeling of being
Yeah.
energized from writing.
But you're like me now. You're old.
Yeah. My gym is actually a keyboard.
Right. Well, I was really interested in that. The next one is a difficult one, but because I often ask this question of authors, but they kind of don't know most of the time. Who kind of inspired your writing style? And was there an inspiration, or did you just like kind of work it out on your own?
Well, I think I do know the answer to this one.
Oof, well, because most authors go, no, it's all mine. I've never read another book in my life, and I've never. And you're right. Okay, so, sorry.
So I've gone on record, I think, as saying that Anne Rice and the early Vampire Chronicles were quite influential on me, and actually the descriptive style she had, uh, that definitely rubbed off on me. And I feel as though some of the feedback I've had, certainly about Il Lupo and about the descriptions of some of the scenes there, um, not that it's the same or comparable to what Anne Rice did, but you get a feeling that the setting is important, right? In order to feel what the characters are going to feel, you've got to find yourself walking in their shoes, and in order to do that, you've got to be on the same streets. And
Yeah.
that somehow works for me. I was definitely shaped by that.
You before you write about somewhere, do you have to have actually been there?
No.
No, because you can just do the research.
Yeah. So with Il Lupo, I've been there. I've been
Yeah.
to everywhere in that book, essentially.
So the Samsara Club, does it exist or not?
The Samsara Club is in the second book.
That's oops, sorry.
Yeah. Spoiler alert! But I can answer that for you. There used to be a club years ago in Brixton
Right.
called the Fridge.
Right.
And every so often, this is back in the sort of hardcore house music type era in the
Good old
late
days.
90s,
Good old days.
back in the good old days. And every so often, I think it was a Friday night, once a month, they used to do a night called Escape from Samsara.
All right.
And that's where I got it from.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Well, I won't divulge any more information for the next novel. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
All right. Well, carrying on with that theme. Because when I read your book, I was more along the ideas of like, have you read any Marilyn Robinson?
No, I haven't.
She wrote like the Gilead and stuff, and her story arc in most of her books is very much like your story arc of this kind of emergence of. I hope you don't take this wrong in any way, but like I see your structure of this book is like a romantic fiction. You have this group of friends coming together. It's not romantic, but you have this group of friends coming together who obviously care for each other deeply, and they work together to get to this end point, going through the dip and the hardship and stuff. And like, I just wonder, because Anne Rice is the same. She's an emergence kind of story arc writer. But yeah, I as I was reading your book, I was like, who does this remind me of? And it was like, oh, right, okay. And my first thought was her. So I just wondered if she'd had any influence on you. But it might be something worth checking out, because it's the emergent story of the way that you write is so comparable, and she's a brilliant descriptive writer as well.
Interesting.
It's just
I'll look into that.
I just wondered if she had any kind of influence. Next question. Il Lupo 2.0.
Yes.
So Il Lupo was something you had in your head. Yeah. Is this something that you're building that's new? Is this a new story, or is this still something that was in the back of your mind that had to come out?
I'm going to say a little of both.
Right.
Little of both. It really is an extension of the story from Il Lupo,
Right.
and it sort of extends that story arc a little further. You could, and I've pondered this recently while I've been editing 2.0. You could slap these two books together and bind them up and call them an epic, right? You really could. 2.0 starts a week after the first one finishes or thereabouts.
For those listening authors, don't do that.
Nobody will buy it, right?
No.
But it really does sort of roll from one book. Although there's a distinct end to the first book, there absolutely is a distinct end and a distinct beginning to the second one. It's a clear break point. It's an extension. So I had an idea where I was taking it long before I wrote it.
Yeah.
But then when I got in and started to write it, of course, it evolved significantly. And it sort of grew legs, as they say.
On top of that, with Il Lupo 1, hopefully that's the correct word to say, or just Il Lupo. Did the thing in your brain, did that get written on the page? Do you know, like, or was it something different by the time you'd kind of finished the book?
Gosh, that's a tough question.
Because you had the story there, obviously. You had an idea of how you were going to encapsulate what you were thinking and the idea of what you were going to write. I just wondered if it actually turned out, was the story what was in your head, or did it turn out slightly different? Because I can see distinct parts to the book which could have gone in so many different directions. So I'm like, oh, but it could have gone off down, with the Italian family, we could have gone down this path. And when he meets, I won't go into, I don't want to spoil anything. So when he meets a certain person who is related to him, the wolfy person, I'm like, God, that could be a brilliant way to go down that line, and that could be. And I was like, did you stick to a strict thing that was
that particular character you're referring to was not in my head?
Right. Okay.
He was part of the evolution of the story. So you've picked a really good example there, because he did come up during the process of writing it.
Because I was like, there's a brilliant book just there.
Yeah, there is, and I've strongly considered doing a prequel around the backstory of Telemaco Rousseau.
Because I'm going to ask a question about him in a minute, but I just think that there is so much backfill to be done. Do you know what I mean? We don't really get to see the whole of the character,
Yeah, and I wanted him to be quite mysterious. He's this dark, mysterious guy.
The next question. we'll leave that character there.
Well, let me just say this about the story itself. Right, for those of you that have read it, it starts at a point that is actually midway through the story. It starts off in a session with a psychiatrist, which occurs midway through the story arc. So you have that meeting, and then you kind of jump back to the events that led up to that meeting. And then you sort of leapfrog over it, and then you get into the second part of the book. That was not in my head to do that.
Right.
That happened after I started writing it. I had this thought that it made sense to me somehow that I would get everyone tuned into the fact that there's all sorts of stuff going on here.
Yeah.
And then I would rewind back to when everything appeared to be as normal might be at the start of that story. And then what event led to the next event, to the next event, and the next.
Yeah, I don't know if these things come by feeling or not, but sometimes they just seem to feel right, don't they? Yeah. Getting back to, is it telling? The things with reading names is I can't ever. I'll ask a person a question about this character and they'll go, "That's not how you say it."
Yeah. Well, I pronounce it Telemaco.
I hope I can ask you about the key characters in your book, because Telemaco, because I can say his name now.
Yeah.
Like the thing that got me about Telemaco was I couldn't work out if he was a good guy or if he was a bad guy. And maybe that's what you were going for, because I couldn't dislike him, even though I really should have disliked him, because he just seemed to be trying to survive.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, should I hate someone for just trying to live? It's and I just wondered what you think he is, if that's even a thing, or maybe that'll come out in the next book that I haven't partially read.
Yeah, well, look, Telemaco is damaged goods, right? He's a victim
Yeah,
in amongst all of this. In this story, he doesn't have quite the joie de vivre that Will might have. On being bestowed with these gifts, he's definitely a victim of the curse. However, over the years that he's had to live with it, he's had to accept the fact that if he is to survive, then he has to live a certain life and live in a certain way. And it's numbed him somewhat to the reality of what he's become. But that's not to say that he isn't still human.
yeah, because I don't get a sense of him being an evil bad character.
No.
He's kind of like, all right, he's a bit mischievous and he's a bit mixed up, and all right, killing people is probably never a good thing, really.
Yeah.
I couldn't
But
dislike.
he's never killed anyone
Right.
himself, right?
Yeah.
Not with his own hands, not as a human being.
No, but I suppose it's like you have to rationalize the animal side of yourself, knowing that that's happening, don't you? I don't know. I just really wondered, because I had so many. Like, I'd read a bit about him, and I was like, "What a bastard!" And then I'd read another bit, and I go, "Oh well,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
And yeah, that was kind of deliberate. I wanted there to be things about him that I loathed and abhorred,
yeah,
but I also wanted to feel some sort of tug of sympathy. I also wanted him to be like cool,
yeah."
and he kind of is, right?
Well, I think he started off in my head as this cool kind of narcissistic character, and by the end of it, I just felt really sorry for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh, you've had to put with so much shit through your life. Even though you are a ripped, muscled god, and every woman,
Yeah. Handsome
even
chap.
even though you've got a dead caterpillar above your eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wondered what kind of character he was, but obviously maybe that was the idea, was to hide him underneath that.
Well, it's an interesting bit of feedback I got from a Goodreads reviewer who I was exchanging messages with after she'd read the book, and she said that she felt like she ought to hate him when she first encountered him. I feel like I
Yeah.
ought to hate this character, and then she was
Well,
like, "I don't quite hate him yet, and I don't quite hate him yet." And has he written this properly? Because I kind of like him, I think,
yeah,
and I feel sorry for him,
that's
and
that's the sense that I got out of it. You portrayed him initially as this being this narcissistic bag of poo, but actually
yeah,
he's not. He's just
no,
just a guy. He's just a general guy who's trying to get through the life and the world as he is. He's not particularly nasty to the family he meets. He's not. He's just a bit of it's a bit of a strange character, and I won't say what happened in the book, but I was fairly disappointed in not getting to know him any better
yeah,
by the
yeah.
end of it. Let's say it that way.
Yeah, yeah. But yes, as I say, I've got a I've got a hunch that there might be at least one and possibly more prequels to a Lupo, which heavily feature Telemaco.
If out of you fill out the other characters so well.
Hmm.
I mean, even Connie is filled out so well for the part that she plays. But then with Telemaco, I'm like, I need to know. I need to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you've mentioned it before, but like, there's an underlying tone of mental health
Yes.
in the book, because Charlie doesn't really know what's going on, does he?
No.
And what I liked about it was that the realization of the beast inside him seems to help him in a way. I just wondered if that was what you've obviously always spoken about stuff in your past, but I just wondered
Yeah.
if that was part of the reason for like writing the book. The as you say, they can't say it, the catharsis, the thing you
Yeah.
get it out of your system. That's it.
Yeah. That thing. So yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. Right. So two of the big themes are grief and depression and anxiety. Right, I'm wrapping depression and anxiety up together. Charlie suffers from anxiety and sort of depression, and Frobisher has lost his father, and he suffers with grief. He self-medicates with alcohol, and his decision making is extremely suspect, right? Because his overconfidence, his bravado, and the alcohol doesn't lead to good decision making.
No.
And there's a kind of lesson there. And with Charlie, the fact that he's got asthma, he's got hay fever, and he starts to suffer with incredibly debilitating and shocking panic attacks, and he really feels like he's unraveling. And then he's somehow immediately perfected by the acquisition of a curse. And it's a bit like somebody who suffers with mental health going out and getting blind drunk or taking drugs and thinking in that moment, do you know what? I feel all right now. I'm going to do this again tomorrow night.
Yeah.
It's not all right. At some point, that curse is going to come back to bite you. And there is an allegorical aspect to that around the curse.
Because like having spoken to you outside the podcast and stuff like that, I noticed that there's an element of Nick in you from your past.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if there's an element of Charlie in you necessarily, but maybe have they come out of being part of you as characters?
Both of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, so I suffered with panic attacks and agoraphobia after my brother Richie died, and you know, it really was utterly life-changing and debilitating, and my social world, which had been gigantic to that point, shrunk to 2 or 3 people, and I didn't see them very often for 6 months. And the journey back was long and arduous, and laced with the sorts of traps that people in their early 20s or mid 20s are often tempted with, you know, and it was no good.
Yeah. And my final part of this question, you'll be glad to know, I see Ernest as kind of a father figure and a guide that sat behind the scenes. I just wondered if you had someone that came into your life and did that for you.
I didn't.
Right.
No, I would have loved to have had an Ernest in my life, I think.
Okay.
I didn't have that type of influence at all. There was, I mean, my dad was a hugely educated and very intelligent human being, but he wasn't really a very fatherly kind of a father.
No.
And I didn't have that kind of grown-up mentor guide
That's
when I
something you
was
would have
young.
kind of wished for, and that's
Yeah.
why you brought that character into there, so they would have that guidance.
Yeah, I think he came from the void.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just interesting because every time I read a story or a novel or something like that, what a lot of people don't realize is there's probably a lot more behind it than you actually think. You know, some people like Asimov wrote 500 odd books, so how much can you get out of your own life like that? But most people don't write more than 5 or 6 books in their lives.
Okay.
But normally the story is about them. So when I read a book, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that's come from, or what's that character do, or why is that? You know, I just wondered if you had a father figure, and I don't know. I it's like I've had partners come into my life and kind of be there for the supportive role and stuff like that. So I just wondered really if that was a kind of thing that underlied it.
No, I have to say I'm a huge fan of Ernest Wainwright.
Yeah.
I love that character. I love so much about him.
When we did the podcast together, I have to say I didn't know you as well there, and I was very self-serving because when I read the book, Ernest just stood out to me.
Right.
And I was like, if I met Ernest in real life, I would actually be a bit in love with him because it's just my idea of the most perfect English gentleman, and he seemed just like a little bit of something out of history.
Yeah.
And someone you could sit down and talk to and tell anything, and he'd be very, very nice about it, but he'd tell you he's right. So like when you were saying let's collaborate, let's do this and whatever, I was like, right, okay, I have to work out somewhere that I can get Ernest in my podcast.
And there he is, folks. Episode
Yeah,
105, I think, wasn't it?
yeah. I was like, I could take Nick and I could put Nick in it. Nah. He's like,
Nah.
nah. I was like, oh, I could meet him just outside the psychiatrist, and then, no, I want Ernest.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that we managed to get Ernest in the podcast. That was really good.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Hopefully, in the future, maybe I have read some of Greg's book, and I have to thank him for what he's done for me in his book as well. That was page 60, just in future. Okay. Lastly, because we've been on far too long, haven't we? Any other things apart from Il Lupo 2 in your head for the future works?
Yes.
That you can give us a clue about, or is
Yes.
it all under wraps?
Yeah, there's one of them that's a little bit under wraps, but that's going to be the next one I write. It will be a break from this genre. It will be a work of commercial fiction.
Right.
It will be essentially a story of love lost and revenge. So some classic themes, and it will be set in, broadly speaking, modern day America, sort of the 1970s in Florida.
Right.
I've got a premise. I've got an outline of the story. You're gonna laugh your socks off at parts of it, but it's going to be a good, gripping, get him back the bastard type of story.
I like it.
So that's that one. That I've actually started on that one,
Yeah.
as well. Additionally, I have a plan to write a novel about a more spiritual aspect of me, I suppose,
Right.
of what lives inside me. I was listening to a lecture about the Bhagavad Gita
Right.
by a chap called David G. If you go onto YouTube and put in David J.I., all one word, David G. Yeah, he's an incredible human being, and he's got the most spellbinding voice I think I've ever heard. And I was listening to this talk he gave on the Bhagavad Gita, which is essentially, one of the templates for understanding spirituality in the ancient world.
Yeah.
And I have a powerful desire
To
explore that in a modern setting.
Mm.
And the premise is along the lines of a psychiatrist who works in some sort of facility where a patient gets put in front of him who claims to be God.
Right. Okay. That sounds
And
good.
I'm going to take it from there, basically.
Yeah. Wow, that's going to take some writing, that.
Yeah, that's. I'm setting myself a challenge there, because I
Yeah.
could really upset a lot of people, and I could really get it wrong. But if I get it right, I will love it if I get it right.
To me, like, I think one of the things that I've kind of learned is, as long as you're happy with it, you'll find your audience. If anything with this podcast has told me that, there are people out there that have the same thoughts of yourself, and so you will find your audience. But that's I wouldn't be worried about that. I'd be worried just about the heavy nature of that's going to really take a lot of head space and organization, isn't it?
It is. I feel sort of drawn to it.
Yeah. Well, the thing for me is, if you're not interested in what you're writing about, I mean, I've done some ghost writing for people, and sometimes the thing that you're writing about, God bless whoever's listening to this, sometimes it doesn't inspire you, but the things that do inspire you, I find that I can lose hours in. So yeah, if it interests you, you should. I'd go to anyone out there. If you've got a story to write it. For God's sake, please put it out there. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I was exchanging messages with somebody on I can't remember which social media platform it was a couple of weeks back, and this chap said to me that he had always considered an interesting premise for a werewolf story would have been, and he listed out a couple of points that he had not seen written about and thought would be interesting. And I said, hey, look, don't come on social media giving away your best ideas, because if you don't write that stuff, somebody else will, and it's your story. You should crack on and
Yeah,
just write
definitely.
it. Don't worry about if you're any good at it or not. Write the damn thing.
They say that everybody's got a good book inside them, and
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that, and probably more than once if you're out there. And yeah, and of course, are you going to continue with the podcast?
Well, yes, I've got a small pipeline of interesting people to spend a bit of time with. They won't be quite as interesting as yourself. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Well,
But I'll be saying something different when they're on the
of
other side of
course.
this
Yeah,
microphone.
don't worry. I know how this celebrity world goes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've got I think 5 authors that I'm going to interview, and we'll be doing straight interviews about their work. I'm also going to spend some time with an old friend of mine who's a karate sensei. His name is Chris Brown, and he's a 4th Dan, and he is a full-time karate instructor. And I'm going to spend a bit of time speaking with him about karate, which, as you know, is one of my lifelong passions. And I hope there's more that we can explore together as well, Fen, because I think, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't got to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean the great thing is to just get out there and get it done. I've really enjoyed the 5 that we've done, and God bless you if you've listened to all 5. Well done.
Yeah.
And it's I as I said before, I'm not blowing smoke up Greg's ass. His book is genuinely good. So definitely go have a read. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say or not, but I'm almost 200 odd pages into his second one.
Yeah, you can say it. You can say it.
I got it first. Ha! I'm in competition with his mother-in-law. So
Fen is actually being asked to write a short foreword for the second book.
yeah.
So that will hopefully
Mancunian, it'll be just something like It's Dead Ace or something.
hopefully it'll be It's Dead Ace and not It's Rubbish,
And it's very different writing than the first one, but it grabs you right from the start, which is really, really cool. So I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you keep it up because it's been fun. So this log cabin, I hope it's getting B&B'd and ready for the next person.
Well, it is. We're going to get we'll get the deep clean team in, obviously. I mean, that goes without saying.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, can't help it.
Yeah, cocking your leg up against the furniture. Anyway, that does just about wrap it up, folks. For the last time for now, Fen and I have survived a night at the log cabin. We've talked the night away. Actually, we almost have talked the night away tonight.
Sorry about that, guys.
Sorry, folks. We've rabbited on a bit there, haven't we? The sun's up. It's safe for us to head for home. Next time out on Pod by the Fireside, we'll be starting what you might call business as usual mode. So it will be me interviewing some other people that you've possibly met before, possibly not met before, but they'll be new to this podcast. This series has been immense fun for me and for Fen, and I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to listen in. If you've listened to just a little bit here and there, I'm really grateful for that. And if you have, as Fen says, done the full 5.5 hours or something it's going to be in total, then hats off to you. And I hope you've had some fun too and learned some stuff along the way. Remember, links to our socials are in the description in the form of handy link trees. So you get one link for me and one for Fen. And all you need to do is click on that and you get links from there to all our stuff, and we can update that as new stuff becomes available. And you just need to keep that one link forever, and you've got everything we're ever going to do. Clever, huh? So, with that said, Fen, should we do the 2 Ronnies thing one last time?
It is sort of already the thing, isn't it?
It is the thing. And so, with that said, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Right.
Hey.